Greetings, dear viewers, ladies and gentlemen. This is Addis Dialogue. Today, we'll be talking about Ethiopia's access to seaports. Previously, Ethiopia used to bask in its access to sea outlets before it ended up being a landlocked nation with its millions of people. So the question here may be what went wrong and what would Ethiopia gain if it had a sea outlet as we speak. In order to answer all these questions, I'm joined by my guest, Associate Professor Ayele Bekerie, a great historian who will break down all these matters so that we will have a better understanding of the situation at hand. With the program, I am Shifara Olakum. Do stay with us. Associate Professor Ayele Bekerie, thank you so much for making the time to talk to us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Historically speaking, Ethiopia used to have access to sea outlets before it all of a sudden ended up being a landlocked nation. So walk me through those heydays that Ethiopia had, alternatives when it comes to sea outlets at hand, and what were the historical elements then?
The ancient Ethiopia was like, for instance, if you just simply take Africa, in the ancient times, there was Egypt, there was Nubia. Egypt, of course, we know Egypt of the present too. Nubia has changed to Sudan. And then Libya was the ancient Libya. All those are in the northern part of Africa. The rest was Ethiopia. And even the ocean, when you take into consideration the Atlantic Ocean, was not called Atlantic Ocean at that time. It was called Ethiopian Ocean. So we're talking about, in ancient times, perhaps one of the most influential country, one of the oldest civilizations. So much so, by the time Christianity emerged, at least in our part, in the 4th century of the Common Era, or what we call AD 2, after birth of Christ. By 4th century, our part is known as Aksumite civilization, and the Aksumite civilization was one of among the four largest civilizations of that time in the so-called known world. It doesn't extend everywhere. Aksum was one of them. And then the key for Aksum to be so great, so powerful, was linked to its ability to have a very expanded trade across the Red Sea, into the Arabian Peninsula, Persian Gulf, India, and all the way to China. And the same thing here along the Nile River, especially Nubia and Egypt. So that's how far it extended in terms of its empire. So the key now is having large trade, global trade in the context of the ancient world. Having vast trade means that they have to have a way of making sure that goods are exported as well as imported. So all the key stations along the route of the trade, they have to station soldiers. Sarawit in Amharic. The soldiers actually will be permanently placed in those key stations. So much so that all the goods would be, transported back and forth without any kind of harms, or without them falling into harm's way. So that was the incidence. Now, the trade built the Aksumite Empire. And not only trade, agriculture too. You see, we probably were the first to utilize oxen paired
the plow.
The plow agriculture actually started probably with us. For that time, plow agriculture was a revolutionary. Because
it was a discovery.
Exactly, you are just using hoes to dig and put the seeds in. but the plow agriculture was a revolutionary. So you can think it is easier for us to imagine that because of plow agriculture, we were able to produce surplus food and the crops, which we could export for other parts of the world.
Wow.
So that's one. Two, Aksumite Empire was minting their own coins. Okay?
All right.
Those coins, archaeologists have found them in places like Saudi Arabia. They found them in Yemen, now Yemen. In those times, it was Southern Arabia.
So it was global.
Exactly. And Nubia, India.
Wow.
In all those places, archaeologists have found the leftover coins. And the coins were minted in gold, silver, and copper.
Wow.
Okay? So that's the extent of that empire, which included the ports on the Red Sea, and of course the main port that the Aksumites were using used to be called Adulis port. Adulis, and then at Adulis they found a statue, monument, with clear carved documents, an inscription.
Okay.
An inscription in pre-Ge'ez, and then Greek letters. And then actually the name of the emperor the name of the emperor is not indicated on it's called the throne, the throne of Adulis. The throne of Adulis. It has a throne as well as a stela, where all the activities of that particular king was documented. Mm-hmm. So a merchant from India passing from North Egypt to India stopped by Adulis and was able to witness this throne and an inscription, which later was copied by him. And then we have that copied document is available, and it's a very valuable historical document in terms of going back as early as the 4th century AD. That's one point. The second point, in terms of its maritime strengths of the Aksumite Empire, was during the 6th century of the Common Era, at the time of Emperor Caleb. Mm-hmm. Emperor Caleb was a devoted Christian, and then he learned that across the Red Sea, in a place called Najran now is located in Saudi Arabia. Those who converted to Judaism were prosecuting, were killing the Christians, and he was not willing to tolerate that. So he mobilized army with ships, and some of the ships came from the Byzantine Roman Empire, because there was Christian solidarity. Okay. By that time, the Romans have already converted to Christianity. So ships were sent to Emperor Caleb, and Caleb crossed the Red Sea, went and defeated the Jews. Okay. Actually, those who believe in Judaism, that's better word, because ethnically speaking, they are Arabs. Okay. They just converted to Judaism.
Converts, okay.
Yeah, he converted to Judaism. He was successfully defeated them, and then returned back, back to, of course, what we call Western Ethiopia. By the way, historian Herodotus, the ancient historian Herodotus, used to identify Red Sea as a part that divides Eastern Ethiopia from Western Ethiopia.
Wow.
So what the place called Yemen, all that used to be called Eastern Ethiopia. Actually, Eastern Ethiopia extended all the way to India. All the way to India. In fact,
it was so vast, so huge.
It's a really vast empire that we're talking about. So that's, to me, is just like, in the ancient times, as well as in the medieval times. Medieval times is starting from the 13th century of the Common Era, all the way to the time when cities became permanent, like building the castles of Gondor. That's an 18th century phenomena. Up to that time, the monarchy was mobile. They were moving from place to place. Okay. Even in those times, all the goods that they needed, be it material goods or strategic goods, were brought in without any kind of hindrance. Even in times of the ports being controlled by Turks, and of course at a later period controlled by Massawa, for instance, was controlled by Egyptians, but still they managed to get access to the sea. Yes. That sea was officially interrupted and became official only in 1993 European calendar.
All right.
Officially Eritrea became independent.
Yes. All of a sudden, Ethiopia became bereft of this opportunity, and it ends up being a landlocked nation in 1993. What's the main reason, and who were the orchestrators, and how did this go down in history from what you have observed?
We have to remember that we have access to the sea for thousands of years.
Yes.
And it was actually the loss, which is really a shock, because you're so familiar with it, you're part of it, your narratives were generated from what you've done on that sea, and then the route to the sea, as well as the return. And so with all those historical events and documents and greatness, all of a sudden, when you find yourself that you no longer have access to the sea, that you are landlocked, to say the least, is very shocking. Now, the immediate cause of that, even though the Turks have occupied Massawa, the Egyptians have occupied Massawa, the main event as far as us being devoid of the use of the port or access to the sea was the scramble for Africa. Is the 1884 Europeans gathering and decide carving up Africa to their respective countries. I think that was what really ultimately led for us to lose access to the sea, because our area, Eritrea, was colonized by Italy. Djibouti was colonized by France. Sudan was colonized by British. Somaliland, the same thing. British, in fact, was divided into two parts: British Somaliland and Italian Somaliland. So those three colonizers, in their times, were very powerful. They were very powerful, so much so that they eventually were involved in two world wars, First World War I and World War II. So Italy started with what? First possessing Assab, which was the main port for us. So once they kind of possessed Assab, they then step by step took over Massawa, and then they started moving up to the highlands, and then ultimately anything beyond Marab became their colony. And not only that it became their colony, but it became a station in which that they prepared their armies. They brought their armies, their weapons, to do what? To invade Ethiopia twice. One in 1886, in European calendar, 1896, and then second time, 1935 to 1941. So that kind of, entrenched their position as a colonizer of Eritrea, which lasted for about 60 years. You could say the same thing with French Somaliland. And then actually, when the Italians invaded Ethiopia, we were trying to get the weapons that we bought to transit it through Djibouti. And then the French government didn't allow us to transit those army materials. So that's one important factor. And you could say the same thing in terms of the colonization process. The colonization process detached the mainland Ethiopia, what we know now Ethiopia. It created a kind of
boundary.
You could call it boundary. Somehow prevented us from reaching Red Sea.
Okay.
Okay.
So it was a blockade or something like that.
It's a sort of a blockade,
Yes.
even though, you see, this is very important to note. When you talk about the people of the region, Horn of Africa, Northeast Africa, the people, like for instance, if you take the Somalis, because of boundaries that the colonizers have created, put them in what? In Ethiopia, in Djibouti, as well as in Somalia. And so the people are actually, they share the history that I just outlined for you.
Yes.
They shared that history. You go to Eritrea, you find people who speak a language that's being spoken also in Ethiopia, proper Ethiopia, like Tigrinya, for instance. You could find the same situation with the Somalis. You could find the same situation with the Afaris, and then all the other ethnic groups. So therefore, what is important, significant here, even though the colonizers have intruded in our areas, the people have common history, a heritage that they share. So therefore, I think it's very important for us to always be cognizant of that, because ultimately, when we attempt to find a solution of Ethiopia becoming back to a position of having access to the sea, we have to go back to the pre-colonial history and utilize that for us to be able to find solutions peacefully, to find solutions so that that solution would be vital, important for all,
in a win-win
in all
situation.
countries that are sovereign, that are members of the United Nations, that are members of the African Union. So therefore, whatever approach that we are going to utilize should be an approach that takes into consideration the common heritage that we all have.
Exactly.